Welcome to the Full FX Unfiltered, this edition in association with 360T. And I'm delighted to be joined by Gavin Wells, Head of Swap Strategy at 360T. Gavin, lovely to see you as always.
Thank you, Colin. Very nice to see you back on these shores.
Yes, I would say it's nice to be back, but it's February. So last year, Gavin, I heard about this thing called Sun, which I thought was called something totally different when I found out what it actually did. So what is Sun at 360T?
Very good question, Colin. I'm glad you asked. Sun is the swap user network. It's a swaps order book. It's part of our MTF, and it's a new platform that brings best practice from other FX products and indeed other products into the FX swap market.
Okay, so can you sort of describe some of these best practices? I mean, how the model works?
That's fair. The first thing was price transparency. We felt that the swap market had lagged behind other products in FX. The lack of price transparency was addressed with a swap data feed that we created, a group of banks giving us prices that we could aggregate and produce a view of where the market was. So the first thing you see on the platform when you look at it is a central pillar where there's an indicative rate that tells you where's the best theoretical mid of that tenor in that currency. So once you've got that, you can then exchange risk at that mid. The traders can put interest in to match with each other at a mid rate. They can, of course, leave resting bids and offers. You'd be foolish to just have a mid.
Yes.
But that wasn't enough because you now need to blend E. E, as I'm sure we'll talk about, is very strong now in the swaps market. So you wanted to blend e-commerce with the voice traders, so it's a pool that does both. But to enable e-commerce, or EFX, you needed to automate credit. So price transparency, where you can trade, you can offset risk, or you can market make to create risk. APIs and GUIs together on a regulated platform which aligns to ESMA's latest definition of such. That really, in essence, is what it is and the benefits it brings.
And ESMA's definition is a whole new can of worms at the moment,
I saw
isn't
your
it?
article, yes.
So effectively, it sounds to me, I mean, one of my questions with the automation of FX swaps over the years has been, if you look at the turnover data from the world's FX committees, the voice broking community still does very, very well in swaps.
It does.
And it seems to me what you're describing there is something that is actually an automated version of what the voice broker does, because people like to trade at mid.
I think you need all participants in a market. I don't think you can replace the voice brokers. Because of things like cock dates. I think where you can add is there's been little change in the swap market since I stopped trading in 2000 or so. It hasn't advanced an awful lot when you look at the UIs. What we see is a need now for algo execution, and that requires automation and APIs and automated credit, and that's just to give best execution, whether you're bank or buy side. You see, I think part of the volume growth is the increase in funding. The use of swaps for funding, and that's brought new participants from other markets into FX, but they're bound by their product mandates for who they are, and for a lot of people that means futures. And so you've seen the fungibility, the cross-product EFPs that started 20 plus or 15 certainly years ago.
In our lifestyle,
work started on that,
Yes.
And that needs automation. That's a very manual process, which requires APIs, and so those two together, I think are that's part of what is driving this desire to have a change in FX, in swaps.
So clearly this is an evolution. How do you see this evolution continuing? Is there actually an end goal for this evolution, or is it, as the word describes, can it continue to evolve?
I don't think there's ever an end state for a market. I think the market growth, which will come through automation, is one thing, but you can't ignore the underlying part of the market, which is the traders. So you need the voice brokers, you need the automated platforms, you need better technology on the platforms, but you need the traders. You've got to keep a level playing field, I think. It makes the market stronger if both the e-traders and the voice traders have similar tools to use. So whilst you're doing this work to enable algos and to enable fungibility of things like EFPs, you've got to give the traders better tools so they can automate where they want to, so they don't have to worry about manual processes such as the soft matching and the credit checking,
Yep.
such that they get the best possible use of credit lines. We know how much credit costs, and so maximising that opportunity. And so by giving traders those tools, you enable them to focus on the more complex pricing that these new products demand. And that is the current evolution of the market, but a particular end state, I don't think there is one.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, obviously you mentioned clearing now. I mean, do you see clearing becoming a bigger part of the FX swaps market? This has been a bugbear of mine for about 10 years,
Okay.
you know this.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, is it realistic somewhere in this evolution?
So clearing has a very good role to play in the markets.
Yeah.
It allows you to focus on market risk and remove credit risk. It also guarantees a product in the event of default.
Yeah.
And default is more likely when you look further down the curve.
Yeah.
So when you look at a product that has a 5-10 year horizon, like a cross-currency swap, then I don't know what you're going to be like in 5 or 10 years. Probably broke, so I would definitely take it out. But if it was 2 or 3 days, as the swap market is, or let us say
Yes.
7 or 10 days, I think some of the need of clearing is not so evident, and that's perhaps why it's struggled. There are a lot of people in the market who believe that clearing will remove the friction that is credit by centralising credit. I think that's possible, but the cost of clearing, particularly in the margins you have to post, has to come down. There's good work being done on that in the markets, but it's been around for 12 years, and it hasn't really picked up yet. So whether that comes now, I don't know. I don't necessarily see that as an evolution of the swaps market.
Right.
That's naturally part of FX, NDFs, then options, and maybe swaps. But that's not something I see in the short term.
No, so effectively this is about the automation
Yes, I think
of
so.
the market. So therefore, do you think we'll have the same impact as we had in spot FX? I mean, the credit issue keeps on bubbling up, doesn't it, there?
That's a good question. So I think those who've invested early in the automation of swaps will benefit. Those who've invested in automating credit, or those who've invested in auto pricing or auto hedging. But I think what we learned from spot is democratization is important. If a part of the market is way ahead of the rest of the market, the rest doesn't necessarily want to take part so much. So that democratization, I think, will happen faster. What we learned from spot is that there are third parties already starting to offer the auto pricing, auto hedging platforms and credit solutions, that those who aren't first movers and maybe don't have the same resources can utilize the third parties, and that will level that playing field. So the sort of technology you need to take part, I think, will move quicker than spot. I do think you'll see ticket sizes drop.
Okay.
It's just an observation from all automation. I don't necessarily think it's not a thing that everybody would want in the market.
No,
It puts more strain.
that is an interesting point, isn't it? Because if you look at it, most swaps traders, particularly the short end, like to actually transfer risk in big chunks, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
And historically have always done so.
Yes, that's true. I don't think you can avoid. Automation brings with it things like the enablement of partial fills, the sort of faster, more dynamic matching.
Yeah.
But then you develop tools to manage that. An obvious thing would be minimum clip sizes.
Yeah.
So ticket sizes may drop, but if you say I'm only happy in this amount, you won't get 100 tickets for your $50. You'll get 2,
Yes.
for example.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that we've learned from the spot market is about automation can create the issue of signalling risk or intent.
Yes.
It can be seen, the transparency. You've commented on this in your column many times. So it's good to have transparency, but if you have to develop the tools that enable people to trade in such a way that their intent and interest is still appropriately managed in the market, so there's not leakage of information.
Yeah.
And so whether it's new order types which enable that, we will see. We certainly think that's something that we will offer to do that. But the end result of what you get is perhaps a slightly faster adoption of some things than in spot, but really what you're creating, you are following on the spot path, and you're bringing a greater transparency. So I think whether you're a credit officer, a business head, a trading head, a compliance officer, a lot of those around, what you're getting now is a greater oversight, a greater surety that the FX swap market is as fair and efficient as any or more than any other part of the FX markets.
how close do you think we are to a tipping point in EFX swaps then? Because I mean, it has evolved, and the numbers from 360T, particularly last year, were impressive. You know, against the backdrop of,
Yes.
you know, I compared them to the FX committee data and go, actually, they're significantly outgrowing.
Yes.
So how close do you think we are to a tipping point? Because, yeah, the reality is the numbers being traded electronically are still relatively
Yes.
small compared to, again, spot markets.
That's true. That is true. So I think the momentum has begun.
Yeah.
So the ball is rolling down the hill, for example.
Yeah.
And the reason I say this, there were some who said that we'll never automate credit. And I can understand the challenge that brings. Boy, can we understand the challenge that brings. But already a third of the participants on Sun are, in some shape or form, feeding us credit files during the day.
Yep.
And others are integrating to do exactly that.
Great.
So credit automation is happening.
Yes.
Then there were a lot of people who felt that you wouldn't electronically manage, risk manage swaps.
Okay.
It was more of a human thing because it's nuanced and dates, and yet a similar number of our members, our participants, our users, are e-hedging. And when you automatically price, very often the exhaust of the risk you acquire from the e-pricing is the human sitting on the desk. And actually, a lot of banks, a lot of our users, the reason they've joined is they find that the use of the Sun liquidity pool as an alternative to support their traders in being an exhaust for the e-acquired risk is of benefit. So auto pricing is also happening. So I think we spent 4 years building this. 1 year on the build, 2 years on COVID, or slowed down by COVID, some more than others.
Yes.
And the last year really has been about integration, particularly of credit models and pricing engines.
Yeah.
But it's now starting. And when you look at the distance or the time between the first spot API and the time at which trading on API was really the only way to trade spot,
Yep.
you look at how long that took and look at where the swaps market is, I think we're significantly ahead of spot. We've learned from them and it will be faster.
Yeah.
So it started, momentum is going, and I think it'll now move quite quickly.
Okay. So I guess finally then, what next for 360T in FX swaps? You're head of swap strategy. I'm
Indeed.
assuming you have a window on this.
Yes, I'm very glad you asked me that question, Colin. So that's a very broad question. I think you've got to enable 3 types of people. The first one is the traders. This is the backbone of the swaps market. It's not going to be, what was that joke about the server, the man and the dog, and the one you wrote about years ago?
Yes.
The man was there to feed the dog and the dog was there to stop the man touching the server. It's not going to be electronic like that. The traders need better tools, better order types. They need things like spot-sensitive pips, platforms that do that for them. And they need to be able to do split amounts, especially with the rate moves we're seeing.
Yes.
So platforms need to enable that. So that's the traders. Then you've got the e-traders. And they need to be able to pricing orders into a market is very different to an RFS price. So they need to be able to price interest only, not just market make or provide liquidity.
Yeah.
And then the third, equally important in this world, are the credit officers. And they need to be able to feed credit files or lines of credit and get updates on that in a way that's far more dynamic and flexible that fits with their solutions, either direct or through some of the third-party hubs who are starting to make themselves felt. If you address those 3, and then, quite conveniently, as I know who you're talking to next, then if you have better data, something we're very keen on, as many are in the market, in fairness.
Yeah.
I think increasing the quality of data, whether it's the trading data or the pricing data or the volume data, to enable you to make better pricing decisions. With those tools for traders, for e-traders and for credit, I think that's what comes next to support the evolution of swaps.
I mean, I think it's a fascinating time in FX swaps at the moment.
It is.
And as a former spot trader, I'd never thought I'd hear myself say those words, of course. But because we actually have this interesting dynamic of an evolving market structure, which, as you say, is evolving somewhat quicker than maybe spot did, at a time when, for the first time in nearly a decade, we have interest rate volatility and interest rate differential. So all of a sudden, you know, the swaps market is having a feel of maybe what we would call an old-fashioned market where rates are moving.
Yes.
but it's in a completely new environment. I think that's quite an interesting. It will be an interesting study.
We do think that's the oxygen that fuels the fire, in part because higher rates and volatility generally leads to the opportunity to generate greater revenue. Yep. Greater revenue can lead to greater investment, yep. But also the volatility shows where you need to innovate to keep up with that market. Yeah. So it's never good to say that you like volatility. I mean, volatility can be healthy, it cannot be. Yes. The rise in rates is natural, and I think that will support even more this change in the swap market.
It's going to be fascinating. As always, Gavin, it's great to talk to you.
And you, Colin.
Thanks for coming along today.
Pleasure.
Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back with another episode soon.